谢艺人，感谢云水，谢谢这些观众朋友们对于我们的支持。稍后在华尔街联报节目中，继续为您带来过去24小时的最新新闻报道、评论和精彩内容。观众朋友，大家好，欢迎收看今天的新风视线。近几十年来，中国经济的稳步增长为共产党的统治提供了合法性，而与此同时，美国作为西方民主的灯塔，似乎正受到经济和政治僵化的困扰。中美制度之间的对比及其不同的表现，引发了人们对西方自由市场和自由民主模式有效性的质疑。一些观察家和一些经济学家认为，中国的经济奇迹可以证明还有另一种成功的方式。在这种观点看来，中国的崛起得益于国家主义的力量、儒家思想的智慧以及与私营部门效率的巧妙结合。由于中国的经济增长率此前始终保持在每年 9% 左右，令标准经济学的一些基本要素受到了质疑。也许那些市场金融、法治和产权都不是必要的。从中国的经济成功来看，这些都是不受欢迎的、适得其反的要素。然而，随着这2年中国经济增长的骤然放缓和资本外逃、寻找海外避风港，以上这些论点近来都变得不那么可信了。仅今年8月份，中国资本外流就达到490亿美元。中国资本家也因为担心自身安全和财产安全而纷纷选择离开。在习近平领导下的国家主义达到最高程度的时刻，中国的经济增长则摇摇欲坠，暴露出政府干预日益加强的影响。外交事务网站发表了这样一篇分析文章，叫做《中国的经济动荡不可避免：中国国家资本主义的一场虚幻成功》。文章认为，国家主义式的经济并不是中国经济的救世主，而是对中国生存的一种威胁。这篇文章的作者是一位华人，叫做黄雅胜，他是麻省理工大学斯隆管理学院的经济学教授。他指出，中国经济此前的成功与中国的国家主义无关。尽管儒家思想和国家主义是中国制度的长期特征，但是中国经济的高速增长只是在1978年中国领导人邓小平启动经济改革计划之后才开始的。改革包括慢慢地向世界开放中国市场，允许更多的企业家精神，减少政府的价格控制以及国企的私有化等等。这些政策的集体效果是削弱了国家的权力。因此，中国的增长并不是政府相对于市场权力不断扩大的证明，事实上恰恰相反。通过对20世纪80年代中国经济显著增长的第一阶段的研究可以看出这一点。这一阶段，中国经济是由小规模农村创业推动的，数千万出身卑微的企业家建造了工厂，向中国输送了大量消费品、建筑材料、食品和劳动密集性产品。正如邓小平在1987年承认的那样，这一奇迹与中国共产党的智慧无关。他称农村经济是我们最大的成功。邓小平说，这是我们万万没有想到的。这些企业就像一股自发产生的生力军。他说，中国共产党中央委员会对此没有功劳。黄雅胜指出，中国政府支持或者说故意的忽视这种农村创业精神自下而上的爆发，这一点值得充分赞扬。当年中国经济的腾飞是因为国家放手，而不是因为国家干预。中国各个地区的比较也可以证明这一点。1978年以来，经济表现最强劲的地区包括广东和浙江，是市场化程度最高、国家干预最少的地区。另一方面，国家干预最多的地区，例如中国的东北地区，却深陷高额债务，并常年与较低的增长率做斗争。除此之外，黄雅胜教授还指出，经典经济理论认为，为了创造有利于经济增长的条件，企业家需要有强大的产权。在1979年，中国政府释放了文革期间被监禁的资本家，并且将他们被没收的银行存款、债券、黄金和私人住宅都还给了他们。这一事件表明，尽管中国从未有过美国式的宪法，但北京在邓小平的领导时期摆脱了毛的极权主义，从而给中国企业家带来了安全感和信心。但是现在在习近平的领导下，这种情况发生了变化，中国资本家再次被边缘化，被严重的骚扰。这种待遇的一个极端例子发生在2021年7月， 农业亿万富翁孙大武被判处18年有期徒刑，表面上是因为违反土地法规，但实际上是因为他的直言不讳。近年来，中国企业家变得不愿意投资，并且试图将资本转移到国外。北京的国家控制非但没有获得回报，反而是付出了代价。第三点，黄亚生教授提到了对香港收紧控制对大陆经济发展的影响。香港发达的资本市场以及与全球资本的连接，为20世纪90年代开始的中国高科技初创企业提供了早期的融资。在中国自己的风险投资行业兴起之前，阿里巴巴、百度、腾讯和许多其他科技初创企业都需要靠外资来资助，而大部分资金都是通过香港来的。这是一个典型的全球化的故事，归功于中国的开放政策。外国资本的知识和专业与中国企业家的辛勤工作相结合带来的成功，而创造中国科技经济的力量与创造20世纪80年代农村奇迹的力量是一样的。如今，集权金融剥夺香港自由以及退出全球化，只会削弱中国企业家精神和中国增长引擎的活力。有人说，国家主义对于建设中国庞大的基础设施至关重要，但是黄亚生也指出，不要忘记，中国经济早在基础设施大规模扩张之前就已经起飞了。例如，中国高速公路的大规模建设经历了2次浪潮，一次是在20世纪90年代末，另外一次是在2008年之后。经济增长促进了储蓄，提高了政府收入和土地价值，并为国家项目提供了资金。国家主义并没有带来增长，而是经济增长导致了国家主义。基础设施有利于增长，但是中国对基建的迷恋对未来的经济前景却构成了威胁。不断修建公路、铁路和港口，使中国陷入了不稳定的债务之中。由于这种迷恋，北京选择以牺牲中国农村教育和医疗保障为代价来投资基础设施，这种优先顺序已经产生了破坏性的影响。中国农村的医疗保健体系仍然落后，在一定程度上令疫情期间严格的封锁成为必要的措施，这对中国经济造成了严重且可能是永久性的损伤。而相对于人口规模，中国的人力资本投资也有所不足。斯坦福大学的研究显示，在中等收入的国家当中，中国的劳动力中高中毕业生的比例是最低的。随着经济增长的长期停滞，中国经济表现长期低迷的可能性越来越大。面对这种局面，作者认为中国的国家主义难辞其咎。最后，黄亚生还指出，中国的成功不是自由放任的资本主义的故事，而是渐进和务实的自由化的故事。但是现在，这种实用主义精神在中国已经基本消失。自2013年以来，中国政府对经济增长采取了国家主义的观点。与此同时，对国家安全问题的痴迷使国家武器化，从而牺牲了私营部门的利益。北京背叛并且拒绝了自己曾经的成功模式，结果是经济正在付出代价。如果中国政府在这些基本经济决策上继续犯错误，那么黄亚生教授认为，最终受苦的就是中国人民。以上就是今天新风事件的全部内容，感谢您的收看，与您分享了来自外交事务网站的一篇文章，为什么说中国的经济的动荡是不可避免的？希望您喜欢。这里是华尔街电视，如果喜欢，记得点赞、打赏，并且订阅我们的频道。我们下期节目再见。
Up until last August, there was little to link Argentina, Brazil, China, Egypt, Ethiopia, India, Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and the United Arab Emirates, UAE. Since the decision to invite new members to the BRICS alliance, analysts have been wondering what this set of countries have in common. While at vastly different stages of economic development, the 11 will often adopt the moniker of members of the loosely defined Global South. However, where most see an amorphous grouping of countries, some formal U.S. allies and others traditional anti-Western autocracies, all have space programs and ambitions. This should not be overlooked in a context where the recent BRICS expansion can be seen as a largely symbolic move. If all invited countries officially join BRICS, new collaborative space projects among its members are certainly possible. However, the more significant impact of the expansion may be in the space governance domain. Space governance refers to the complex set of laws, regulations, and frameworks that govern the use of space at both the international and national level. It is inherently a foreign policy issue because space is not owned by any one country and the physics of space requires international coordination. BRICS members have vowed to leverage their expected heftier weight in international institutions to better address the needs of the global South. This counterweight strategy may spill over to the space-related discussions underway in those very forums, such as on international space security in the UN First Committee. While not topping the list of priorities dominated by economic issues, space governance is important. At stake are how to manage collective challenges like space debris and whether the next wave of space exploration will take an adversarial turn. Title 1, From Sputnik 1 to Chandrayaan-3. Space activities are deeply embedded into nearly every aspect of society, powering critical infrastructure like telecommunications, underpinning global financial transactions, fueling climate change research, and enabling asymmetric advantage in the military domain. Both as a power projection tool and a strategic investment to advance national goals, for countries around the world, space investments are no longer optional. There is extensive debate around the complicated question of how to categorize national space programs without imposing technological biases. Regardless of what framework is used, the space programs of the BRICS Plus countries, referring to existing and invited members, span the gamut from Russia's, responsible for the 1957 milestone that kicked off the space race, to Ethiopia's, whose early efforts date to the same era but did not involve satellite operations until 2019. It is impossible to give justice to the breadth of these programs in a few words, but even cherry-picking some highlights shows the permanence of space efforts. Despite dwindling investment in its space program, Russia remains a major launching state and, along with the United States, a primary operator of the International Space Station. China operates Tiangong, the other permanently crewed station in orbit, and with its Long March rockets, came second in total launches in 2022. India's program also encompasses human spaceflight, launch, and satellite development and operation, and recently achieved the first-ever landing to the coveted lunar South Pole with Chandrayaan-3. Brazil and Argentina have also had major space efforts for decades, with fits and starts. Brazil's features an extensive joint Earth observation program with China and the advantageously located Alcantara spaceport. Argentina has successfully developed indigenous satellites and continues to invest in a homegrown rocket, Tronador, albeit at a glacial pace amid recurring financial crises. Rounding out the BRICS Plus group are the relative newcomers, that is, from a programmatic standpoint. The seeds of space exploration in the Middle East can arguably be traced back to ancient astronomy. After becoming the first Arab nation to send a probe to Mars, the UAE recently logged the longest time in space by an Arab astronaut. Saudi Prince Sultan bin Salman Al Saud, the first Arab in space, is a supporter of the Saudi space program, which has also made human spaceflight a focus. South Africa is a leader in radio astronomy and hosts the only operational regional entity dedicated to space weather, intense solar activity that can impact infrastructure in space and on the ground. Egypt, in addition to hosting the newly unveiled African Space Agency, recently revamped its space agency. So did Ethiopia, which began constructing a satellite manufacturing facility in 2020. Finally, there is Iran, whose efforts center around a demonstrated launch capability and satellite development with strong ties to its military-industrial complex. While scope and emphasis vary widely, many of the BRICS Plus members have used space activities to deepen relationships with like-minded countries and to demonstrate autonomy on the global scale. Title 2, Space on the Agenda? It would not be a surprise for space to feature on the BRICS Plus agenda. In May 2022, China officially launched the BRICS Joint Committee on Space Cooperation, intended to enable remote sensing satellite data sharing from 6 operating satellites. Announced in 2021, the kickoff was seen as a response to the satellite collaboration of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, an informal alliance among the United States, Australia, India, and Japan, focused on maritime domain awareness. During the recent summit, and just before the historic lunar landing, Prime Minister Narendra Modi suggested a BRICS space exploration consortium during remarks at the summit. Russia and China regularly make space-related collaboration offers to countries of the global south, such as Venezuela, emphasizing political alignment with those partners. Even when not followed by immediate concrete developments, these announcements make headlines for the soft power value of space. The vast gap between the space programs of its members makes it unlikely that BRICS Plus will materialize into significant multilateral projects. The CIA World Factbook, newly updated to include national space program details, estimates China's 2022 space spending in the range of $3 to $10 billion. The extremely limited spending in Ethiopia and Egypt, in turn, is largely fueled by China itself. Nevertheless, the BRICS Plus label could boost ongoing bilateral and minilateral initiatives, such as the China-led International Lunar Research Station Cooperation Project to establish a permanent lunar base. South Africa formally signed on to this project on the heels of the BRICS Plus summit. Targeted efforts may emerge among a subset of members in areas of shared interest, like Earth observation and geospatial information, a priority for both Argentina and the UAE. The more salient shift from BRICS Plus, however, may manifest as shifting alliances in the ongoing space governance discussions taking place within and on the sidelines of the very forums the bloc wants to overhaul. Title 3, Setting the Tone. All BRICS Plus countries are members of the UN Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, a central setting for space governance since the beginning of the Cold War. It was there that the international community, led by the Soviet Union and the United States as the sole space powers, agreed to the 4 treaties that set the foundational principles for space activities to this day. While space is decidedly not a Wild West, the adoption of new binding measures has slowed to a standstill in the last few decades. Space developments, in the meantime, have raced ahead. The urgency for new space norms is increasing. Whether in increasingly congested orbits or the resource-rich lunar South Pole, conflict will arise in the not-so-limitless domain of space. The space community contains a disparate set of actors with sometimes conflicting interests, largely targeting the same locations. Major space players are vying for influence to define the new rules that will shape future activities. Emerging space nations also take part with fervor, looking to ensure their interests, whether the ability to access space-derived data today or to launch satellites tomorrow, are protected. In the polycentric space system, where the spheres of influence are occupied by multiple countries and non-state actors alike, a diverse global community tackles governance issues in multiple environments, at the United Nations and beyond. These discussions include both binding mechanisms like national legislation and regulation, as well as non-binding ones like best practices and guidelines. This dynamic is a driving assumption in the first U.S. Strategic Framework for Space Diplomacy released last May. The framework articulates a State Department-led effort to advance U.S. space leadership through international cooperation and the promotion of U.S. norms and policies across all forums to govern the responsible use of space. This is where the BRICS Plus expansion may have tangible consequences on space governance, especially considering China's interests in marshalling the voting power of emerging countries in organizations like the United Nations. Nevertheless, it would be wrong to assume country positions on space governance will fall within a simple North-South divide. Title 4, Hedging on Space. Just last month, Russia successfully prevented the Open-Ended Working Group on Reducing Space Threats, OEWG, convened by the UN General Assembly, UNGA, and chaired by a Chilean diplomat, from issuing a consensus report, the product of a 2-year effort, to consider norms for military space activities. In a written statement, Russia described the draft report describing the OEWG's work as unbalanced and reflecting mainly Western approaches, and described responsible behavior as a non-consensual term despite it being one around which the international community has been rallying for the last few years. This view, supported by BRICS Plus allies Iran and China, was, however, not endorsed by others in the bloc that also participated in the process. Brazil and Argentina joined a majority of 39 nations in pushing for an informal summary to be provided to the UNGA so that the group's progress would not be lost. While China and Russia tend to align on space governance discussions, developments on a related front further suggest the rest of the BRICS Plus may not just fall in line. Last December, the UNGA took up a resolution calling on countries to not conduct tests of direct-ascent anti-satellite (DASAT) weapons involving a missile launch to intentionally disable or destroy a satellite in orbit, given the significant debris generated by such tests. Sponsored by the United States, the resolution mirrored the landmark U.S. moratorium, which multiple countries, including the European Union, have also adhered to. While China, Iran, and Russia all voted against the resolution, Egypt and the rest of the BRICS Plus members voted in favor. India, the latest to conduct a DASAT test, abstained. Ironically, it is the expansion of BRICS Plus that reduces the risk of this alliance automatically turning anti-Western in space governance issues. 5 of the countries, Brazil, India, and newcomers Argentina, UAE and Saudi Arabia, have signed on to the Artemis Accords. The accords are a non-binding political commitment to key principles in the conduct of space activities, intended to guide space exploration to the moon and beyond. While largely seen as the U.S. answer to the slow progress in international space governance efforts, the accords have been signed by 29 countries, including Bahrain, Nigeria, and Rwanda, which are not particularly strong U.S. allies. The accords reinforce principles contained in the core space treaties like transparency and emergency assistance, while adding others that have been widely adopted since then and that the United States prioritizes, like scientific data sharing. The accords are central to U.S. strategy to build a global coalition around democratic principles and values, which it sees as key to ensuring growing civil, military, and commercial interests in space are not threatened. As noted in the space diplomacy framework, the United States will compete where necessary against countries that seek to impose a different view of outer space governance. While signing on to the accords does not itself lead to participating in the NASA-led Artemis program to return humans to the lunar surface, the United States has made it clear the principles contained therein are fundamental to any meaningful collaboration. 6 months after signing the Artemis Accords, Saudi Arabia withdrew from the Moon Treaty, a UN space law treaty not ratified by any of the major space powers and thus not considered part of the foundational agreements regulating space. The unexplained withdrawal was not a requirement to adopt the accords but was seen as a symbolic gesture to resolve disagreement between the two documents. The steady progress to increase accords signatories seems to indicate this is resonating. China and Russia may thus find it challenging to sway some of the BRICS Plus members to their view of things. For the BRICS Plus nations with larger space programs, such as Argentina or the UAE, the win-win scenario is one where partnerships with many established space programs remain viable. The hedging strategy that is core to Brazil's foreign policy may show up just as strongly in space debates. The United States and its allies can leverage this to continue courting other space nations, even those politically aligned with Russia and China, to continue building momentum around space norms. In advocating for the accords, the United States should also encourage countries to adopt the core treaties to further the rules-based order for space. Ethiopia and Egypt, for example, have yet to ratify the 1975 Registration Convention, which stipulates the registration of space objects in a public registry. It would be a mistake, however, for the United States and its allies to depend solely on alignment of values like sustainability and stewardship. China's partnerships with emerging space nations are bolstered by whole-of-government efforts, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, where scientific collaboration is often paired with infrastructure investments, loans, and other measures that meet multiple goals of the partner. Because of this, China and Russia may be successful in rallying votes or opposition from BRICS Plus countries with small, resource-constrained space programs. For countries like Egypt and Ethiopia, the short-term gains of siding with China and Russia in space governance decisions may trump the intangible benefit of what may one day be participation in the Artemis program. While not true for all fronts in the space governance landscape, every vote counts in the United Nations, and the United States and its allies should not disregard this interplay of shifting economic-political alliances. The United States should go all in on implementing its space diplomacy framework. With space technologies tied to priorities like climate change, this means bringing in space governance to all engagements with potential partners, whether space-focused or not. While the BRICS Plus expansion does not mean space governance attitudes will fall along north-south lines, China and Russia know very well how to incorporate space into broader engagement efforts, making it an attractive carrot in a strategic bargaining pitch. If BRICS Plus is seen by some as a largely symbolic alliance, few issues are a better fit than space where discussions often involve ideological appeals. But leadership in space governance matters to the United States, and in this environment, shifting alliances like BRICS Plus afford U.S. adversaries another avenue to bolster the opposition.
Hello， 大家好，欢迎关注华尔街电视频道。这期的热点深度继续来关注成为中国人民公敌的许家印。在10月1日，《华尔街日报》报道说，中国政府正面临采取更强有力措施，干预持续萎靡不振的房地产市场，以恢复民众对于房地产市场信心的强大压力。报道是引述了解北京决策方式的这个人的话说，当局正在调查深陷债务危机的中国房地产巨头恒大集团董事会主席许家印是否在公司对烂尾项目进行完工建设的困难时刻，试图将资产转移至国外。很快，中国一位企业家站了出来，怒斥许家印把钱搬到了美国，把债留在了中国，骗了国家，也骗了百姓。我们来看一下这一段视频。
你习家印竟然公然的以中国人民为敌，拉着这个敌对势力，想把你的债务几万亿债务解套，就走上了敌对的套路。因为我有很多朋友都被恒大骗了，40亿被恒大骗走了。他这样的知道这个恒大上市公司很有钱，那么他财务总监就通报了许家印啊，许家印就说：“哎呀，郭总，我们是恒大是这个地产之王啊，地多值钱啊，你把钱存在我这，每年回报15%，一看15%确实不错，又有许家印的担保啊，就借给他。结果不但利息1分钱拿不到，本金全部消失了，毁灭。”
上面的视频是中国企业创维的创始人黄鸿升斥责许家印公然以中国人民为敌，骗国家骗老百姓，更指控许家印把资产转移到了美国。黄鸿升在视频称他有很多好朋友都被恒大骗了。恒大方面说把钱存进去，每年回报有 15%， 但是结果不但利息1分都拿不到，本金也全部毁灭。他的其中一个朋友甚至投资了200亿人民币，最后被这个公司是被拖累至破产。黄鸿升说恒大于2021年出事，官方将所有法律诉讼归结到广东省的高级法院，这是因为政府给许家印一个保护的时间，让许家印能够有时间解决各种各样的纠纷，保护是非常明显。黄鸿升认为，官方最近终于对许家印动手，是因为许家印犯了大忌，用美国的法律进行破产保护。黄鸿升说，在老婆儿子移民北美之后，许家印是再透过发债将中国资产换成了美国的个人资产，然后他要保护美国这个个人资产，将债务扔给中国，所有资产在美国的名下，那么利用美国的政权来解套，再利用中国与美国的对抗政治形势，这便是以人民为敌，以国家为敌。中国恒大在9月28日晚间发布的公告称，公司董事会主席许家印因涉嫌违法犯罪，已被依法采取强制措施，算是拉开了全民声讨许家印的大戏。本质上，许家印作为房地产商，到一个地方拿地投资，不可能是脱离当地的行政审批和相应的监管。往大了说，许家印、恒大还是制度环境的问题，而不只是单个企业或某个行业的问题。你要说许家印作为地产商中的一面旗帜，和煤矿行业中的那些煤老板开拓商业版图的逻辑其实差的也不多。一个是不断借钱找工人盖房子，一个是不断雇挖煤工，不断开口子。这一类型的企业家的财富密码，主要就是和掌握决策权的人之间的身份关系。现在恒大涉及到的债务背后是那些烂尾楼业主接盘，那些与恒大有直接业务合作又无法兑付的中小企业接盘，债务违约需要许多人透支，未来进行偿还，没有法律的强制力追偿，那基本上和明抢也差不多。 有很多人是撑不到未来的，因为银行不会为这些人开绿灯，不然银行就会资金链出问题。而恒大的债务问题也不是一天两天，有一种声音就跟上面一样，是认为许家印的今日涉嫌违法犯罪，已被依法采取强制措施。那导火索就是恒大在美国法院申请破产保护，目的就是把债务留给中国国内，收益留给许家印们。恒大发行了不少美元债，票面利息很高，很多年利率超过 10%。许家印们是自掏腰包买了自己公司很多的债。其实呢，许家印高位卖出股票套现，再买入自己发行的债，被认为是债务人向债权人的转变，也是掏空恒大的重要一环。原本许家印是最大的债务人，因为买了公司债就变成了公司的债权人。恒大在美国申请破产保护，极有可能阻碍所有中国国内债权人伸张权益。优质资产卖掉后，率先偿还美元债，进入许家印们的腰包。你要说许家印怎么这么虎？其实他不是头一天这么豪横了。在10年前，许家印的豪横就显露无遗，还被冠以豪客之名，在功利主义时代如鱼得水。中国的一个媒体中国企业家在10年前就曾写道，许家印他最终会用真正强者的方式重新定义自己，还是落入其兴也勃焉，其亡也忽焉的老套结局？答案呢，在许家印他自己的手中。他用一个个赌局连接另一个赌局串联起来的人生呢，如今定局已成。中国企业家这个杂志在2014年第3、4期有一篇文章叫《豪客许家印》，其中就提到，有野心的老板常常会提出不可能完成的任务，部下在重压之下拼命完成任务，反而会对老板的胆略佩服的五体投地。许家印就是这样的老板，每一次赌局，许家印都像和魔鬼握手，让人眼红心跳。金钱滚滚的地产行业做派，也让许家印带到了恒大涉足的所有产业。在地产行业的格局上，恒大曾是最成功的搅局者。在1997年，恒大拿下了广州海珠区农药厂的一幅土地，就是恒大开发的第一个项目，叫做金碧花园。广州地产界一位资深人士当时就回忆，这是一个没人敢接的项目，而许家印把地皮刮了，重新换了土，由此许家印给他留下了不是上天堂就是下地狱的一个印象。广州的企业无论竞争多么厉害，表面呢都是一团和气，但从金碧花园这个恒大第一个项目开始，恒大打出了沿用至今的开盘必特价，特价必升值的口号。别人都怕恒大开盘，他说就是这样一个项目创下了当年开工、当年开盘、当年售罄的一个奇迹。而搅局者常常要有非常的手段，在广州地产圈子流传着很多恒大的故事，比如欠钱的段子，那其中最多的就是经常拖你1-2年，尾款很难要。在这个人士的印象中，恒大一直是那种很缺钱但又总是很敢花钱的那种人。恒大的广告非常有特色，一直是整版的做，但不太理解恒大这些年真的在足球上烧掉20多亿。在足球上烧钱的举动也曾令同为开发商的杭州绿城足球俱乐部的董事长宋伟平不解，他曾找到一位资深足球人士向他询问此事。在2010年以来，史上最严的房地产调控让地产商的日子呢都不太好过，而恒大的江湖气和草莽气十足，至今和创业初期变化不大。有记者在广州采访了10余位地产行业的人士，没有人认为它发生了质变。过千亿那也不过是规模的简单重复，很多大公司会显出老态行动迟缓，而恒大则不存在这个问题。但是野性的特质带来的风险也可能在1000亿的规模上被成倍的放大。在规模过1000亿的5家房地产行业中，恒大的狼性最足。恒大在1997年才进入地产行业，是5家进入最晚的企业。足球上呢也是一个新手，在这个2个水深的领域，如果没有非常的手段，很难想象后起之秀的这个恒大在当时能如此的快速超越别人。在2012年，当时的美国浑水机构香橼出具了一份做空恒大的研究报告，指出恒大存在行贿、财务造假等问题，并称恒大是代表了中国新型资本主义之糟粕中的糟粕。虽然香橼没有拿出证据，而恒大也是逐条的反驳， 但在很多人眼里，恒大的特点就是激进、胆大。而在足球圈，恒大的口碑呢也不太好。恒大被说他们经常跟看中的球员私下接触，然后再跟俱乐部谈。按照行业规则，这些签约球员是不能私下和恒大接触的。那么一位足球行业的人士说，恒大是破坏了整个行业的生态，别人辛辛苦苦培养的人才都被他们挖走。恒大手握重金，到处挖人，直接导致2013年青岛中能队的降级。在他看来，恒大把这么多足球国脚都买下来，那是囤积居奇的投机行为，跟炒大蒜、炒绿豆没有本质区别，所造成的不过是虚假的繁荣。无论是什么样的非议，那商人许家印要的只是结果。据说恒大普通员工每周工作时间超过60小时，中层超过80小时，高层超过90小时。许家印本人据说也是个工作狂，他经常在凌晨打电话着急开会，在早上8点还要正常上班。一些员工呢，只好租房住在公司的附近，或者住在公司的员工宿舍。恒大还有一套极为严密的管理制度，许家印亲自起草过一本厚厚的恒大学习资料，员工呢是人手一册，其中有几万条规章制度，内容涵盖了吃穿住用行。广州地产界的一位职业经理人就说，许老板许家印非常慷慨，这也是他的优点。恒大的奖励非常惊人，比如地区的分公司如果完成了业绩，那会拿出销售额的1%来奖励老总。他举例说，一家分公司如果完成了20亿的销售，那么老总能够拿到2000万的奖励，这个太刺激了。但是一旦出错的惩罚机制也很惊人，副总级别高管也有可能会被降级，甚至要在几百人的大会上做检讨。恒大足球的奖励机制也很惊人，赢一场奖励500万，平一场不奖不罚，而输一场惩罚300万。2013年，恒大发给球队的奖金就高达1.3亿元人民币。对于金钱和人性的关系，许家印是理解透彻，运用精妙。每逢年底，恒大都会拿出巨量的现金奖励员工。当那些码成堆的钞票放在眼前，有人一次能领走上百万时，他刺激的不仅是眼睛，更是心脏。对于人心和人性的洞察，让恒大是准确迎合了社会的心理，这是看似俗不可耐的营销招式获得成功的重要原因。它的广告底色大部分都是金色、咖啡色的字体，奢华感很足。广告词中少不了奢华2字，壮丽的喷泉、霸气的雕塑也是恒大项目的标配，很符合普通人对于奢华的想象。恒大号称是开盘必特价，这也是用最便宜的价格买到人人渴望的奢侈感。文章作者还提到，许家印是有1块钱总想做20块钱的事。无论许家印心理素质多么好，内心其实都会紧张。许家印源自出身的不安全感，似乎也是加重了他的赌性。他大开大合的操作手法是以时间换空间，他如同来自古龙小说中的人物，招式难看迅疾，却招招致命。他是这个功利时代的一个极客，快速成功，急速成名。政府、投行、娱乐圈、体育圈，他是长袖善舞。许家印喜欢被人称为许教授。据说在一次喝醉酒之后许家印曾经问部下，我怎么样做才能够流芳百世？这个许家印醉酒后曾问部下，我怎样才能流芳百世的段子，在过去10年中也是被不断的引用。目前能找到的最早的出处就是这篇文章。对人心和人性的精准洞察，可能会让恒大的许家印自己也成了被洞察的对象。好了，以上就是今天热点深度的所有内容。更多资讯可以关注6度简报网站，网址是6度brief.com， 在上面各位可以关注各类符合您喜好的简报新闻，有免费套餐，也有更加专业的付费套餐供大家选择。今天的视频就到这里，我们下个节目再见。
And in the future. Hudson carries on that legacy today. We are grateful to have representatives from many of our international friends joining us here today. Many of them from some of our allies are research fellows and senior fellows here at Hudson Institute to improve our understanding and our ability to talk with friends and allies in substantive and continuous ways. I particularly want to thank Ambassador Sandhu for his work advancing the Indo-American relationship. He's been a great friend, and we've had many conversations with him, and I want to thank him for his great representation of India here and his diligent efforts to try to help us understand what's going on in India and in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you, Ambassador. For these and many other reasons, we are honored to host India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jai Shankar. For this discussion, he's going to be joined by my colleague, Walter Russell Mead. This discussion is important, I think, as is evident to most people here, because both of our countries are at a critical point in the history of the world, and the future of that world is going to largely be shaped by our ability to work together and with other allies around the globe to create a better and safer future rather than a more chaotic and a future filled with conflict. Therefore, this is a critical time for us to not only better understand, but better figure out ways to work together as we have never worked together before. Dr. Jai Shankar is a member of the upper house of India's parliament. Before assuming his current role in government, he served as foreign secretary and has been India's ambassador to the United States and India's ambassador to the People's Republic of China, among other countries. I don't think I need to tell this group, he is one of the most respected diplomats in the world. He is considered one of the most competent and around the world, if people have problems, they frequently call him to help them sort it out. He is also the author of a best-selling book, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, which compellingly articulates India's current and future position in the world, and I recommend it highly. Many times people want to understand others through distance. I think it's very important to use the expertise of people who are at the front line and have thought deeply and experienced deeply the issues that are going to shape our world. Joining him for this discussion is Walter Russell Mead. He is the Ravenel B. Curry III Distinguished Fellow in Strategy and Statesmanship at Hudson Institute. Many of you know him as the Global View columnist of the Wall Street Journal, and he is the James Clark Chance Professor of Foreign Affairs and Humanities at Bard College in New York. Walter multitasks. He's author of numerous books, including the widely recognized Special Provenance, America's Foreign Policy and How It Changed the World. His newest book, Ark of a Covenant, The United States, Israel, and the Fate of the Jewish People, has been recognized by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal as Best Book of the Year. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this important discussion. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jai Shankar and my colleague, Walter Russell Mead.
And I think we'll begin with Dr. Jai Shankar speaking for a few minutes, and then we will go to question and answer. Would you like to speak from the podium or from your?
It would be.
Yes, okay, terrific.
Good morning. Good morning to all of you, and it's a real pleasure to be back here. It's been some years, but of course we've been talking to each other. I was told that the topic for the day is India and the new Pacific Order. Am I correct? Now, I wasn't sure whether the Pacific was with a capital P or a small p, but either way, we are into it. For many people, I think, particularly in the United States, it's probably a new idea, something very different to think of India in terms of the Pacific region, Pacific Order, the Pacific Community of Nations. And the fact that we have such a title and it seems natural today is an indication, actually, is one indication of what has changed in the world. Viewed from India's perspective, we today do much more business to the east of India than we do to the west of India historically. We look at our key trade partners, we look at our important economic partners, we look at a lot of our strategic interests, a lot of it is today extending eastwards into the Pacific and beyond. Now, what this has given rise to in the last few years is a concept of Indo-Pacific. That too has been readily embraced by many and contested by a few. But again, it's a concept that has actually gained ground. I often reflect on the fact that the separation, in a way, of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific region is something actually which was an outcome really of the Second World War. That if one looked at a global strategy and global understanding, before that the Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean were dealt with in a much more integrated way, with the emphasis on the Indian. So in some ways, what you are seeing today of the Indo-Pacific coming together, the idea of India contributing in many ways to a Pacific order, is something which reflects really the rebalancing that is today taking place in the world, a rebalancing in which the changed capabilities, positioning, and attitudes of the United States is the central driving factor, but also in one in which the rise of China and its implications is obviously a very, very crucial issue, but to which there are many other moving parts, but an important one is also that of India. Now, related to the Indo-Pacific, again, over the last 6 years, another concept which has gained ground is that of the Quad. It was revived in 2017 after a gap. It was attempted first in 2007. It did not last. It was revived after a decade. It's an interesting question why it worked this time when it did not work the first time. Not just worked, but if you see in 17, it was done at a bureaucratic level, at an undersecretary level in the US. In 19, it became a ministerial forum. In 21, it became a presidential prime ministerial forum. And at every stage, there were people who said, well, this is where it sort of fizzles out, and it seems to be growing from strength to strength. And we will have the privilege of hosting the summit next year in India. In terms of the Pacific order, I think a lot of the global concerns are most acute in the Pacific. One is, one of course is the larger issue of how do you maintain stability in the middle of very major change taking place, because often sharp changes in balances of power and interest and influence can create risks whose management therefore becomes a very crucial issue. But there are some other, I think, key issues today in the world which center particularly around the Pacific. One of them is the building of reliable and resilient supply chains, because the experiences of the last few years have taught us their importance. The other is the promotion of trust and transparency on anything to do with digital. So whether it's telecom, or whether it's artificial intelligence, or whether it's the car that you're driving, really today the importance of trusted providers, trusted sources, trusted geographies, I think this is today a very, very big issue. The third is the over-concentration of production, especially of manufacturing, that if you have over-concentration which is liable to be leveraged, had it happened in any of our national economies, it would have attracted antitrust provisions. Yet it happens in the world, and we are all blissfully, we are sanguine about it. So what are the dangers of over-concentration? What are the implications of over-concentration? How are they leveraged? How are they weaponized? I think is a very big issue today in the world. And if you put it together, I would suggest to you that the world is badly in need of some form of re-globalization. That globalization itself is undeniable. It has struck very deep roots. It has tremendous benefits, nobody doubts that. But the particular model of globalization, which has evolved over the last 25 years, obviously has a lot of risks inherent in it. And today, how to address those risks and create a safer world is part of the challenge facing the Pacific Order. So let me just end with one last remark, because John, there was something you said, which was India and the United States have never really worked before together. I think that is a very thoughtful observation, because dealing with each other is not the same as working with each other. In the past, we have always dealt with each other, sometimes not entirely happily. But working with each other is really uncharted territory. It is a territory which we have both entered in the last few years. And it has required both of us really to overcome what my Prime Minister called the hesitations of history when he spoke to the Congress a few years ago. So how do we create that ability and the convergences and hopefully the comfort to work together? I think that would be very crucial to the future of the Pacific Order. So perhaps with those remarks, Walter, if you would allow me, we can start the conversation.
Terrific. Thank you. Thanks for those remarks, and thank you so much for being here. You really do, Hudson, great honor. I want to say I'm especially grateful because while Hudson is a nonpartisan think tank and we work with people in both parties, many would say that Hudson has closer relations sometimes with the Republican Party. So we especially appreciate that you have reached out in a way, in a bipartisan way, toward the opposition. It reminds us that both India and the United States are democracies, do believe in pluralism, and we at Hudson appreciate this sign of India's concern, faith in that principle. This is also, by the way, I just saw yesterday that Swami Nadan had died at 98, I believe. He was an example of Indian-American cooperation, not on the governmental level, but his work with Norman Borlaug helped establish the Green Revolution, which has been transformational in the lives of literally billions of people in India and around the world. And this is, this reminds me at least of what the US and India, what Americans and Indians can accomplish together. And I hope we will be seeing more of it. Minister Jaishankar, I should say first too, before I get into my questions, that he has agreed to take questions from the floor. And the way we do this at Hudson is we ask people to email questions. I know you all have cell phones here. I know you know how to text while listening. So we ask you to send questions to press, P-R-E-S-S, at hudson.org. And those questions will come up to me. I'll have an opportunity to look at them, consolidate them where we have several questions on the same topic, and perhaps also forestall the possibility, it's not unknown, that sometimes people confuse questions with speeches. So please do that, and we will conclude the meeting with your questions. At the G20 and elsewhere, we hear that India is looking for a change in international architecture or in in the way world politics works and world institutions. I've also heard India described as a reformist rather than as a revisionist power. It seeks real change in the status quo, but not necessarily in the way that perhaps some of our colleagues and friends in Russia and China might do. What is it that India is looking for in change in the world situation, and how does that affect, do you think, India's vision of where we're all going?
Let me put it to you this way, that, the world as we live it today is largely a Western construct. Now, if you looked at the world architecture, to use your words, there's been obviously enormous change in the last 80 years. If one looked at the major economies of the 1940s and 50s, they are very different from the major economies today, and nothing illustrates it more than the G20 itself. The list of the G20 will tell you is the easiest way of actually getting a sense of the changes in the world. Now, for India, when we confront a largely Western created architecture, obviously we would like to encourage and facilitate and induce and pressurize changes which are badly needed. But it is done to add a non-Western layer and a input. So I make this very important distinction where India is concerned. India is non-Western. India is not anti-Western. So when we speak about, and I give you an example which we discussed even at the G20. It's very clear today that if we are serious about climate action, if you are looking to sustain, to ensure that sustainable development goals are well resourced, then somewhere we have to find the financial muscle for that. Now, for us too, it is the international financial institutions, the bank, the World Bank and the fund, which will be at the core of that effort. So a lot of what we are seeking to do is to improve and, I would say, refresh institutions, make them more fit for purpose. And that even applies to the United Nations. We do believe today that a United Nations where the most populous country is not in the Security Council, when the fifth largest economy is not there, when a continent of 50 plus countries is not there, that United Nations obviously lacks credibility and to a large degree effectiveness as well. So the whole, when we approach the world, it's not with a sort of pull down the pillars kind of approach. It is very much what can we do to make it better, fitter, efficient, purposeful. That's the kind of mindset we bring to bear.
Well, I have to say I find myself in agreement with much of what you say, especially when I look at the United Nations, and I think that in the official UN system, India is sort of said to be equal to Luxembourg. They both have one vote in the General Assembly.
I like Luxembourg.
Well, I have nothing against. Actually, if you're ever in Luxembourg, eat the duck. It's fantastic.
Okay.
But but the idea that those two political entities should be equally weighted in the United Nations is, I think, an absurdity that future generations will not be able to understand when they look back at our times. Now, over the summer, you said that there are three big Eurasian powers, Russia, China, and India, and that the Indo-Russian relationship is not transactional, this is geopolitical. How do you see India-Russia relations, especially at a time where Russia and China appear to be working much more closely together than before?
This approach is not something new. In fact, since independence in India, this has been the basic thinking about our geopolitical predicament, which is if there are three major polities occupying the landmass, the central landmass of the world, then how do you ensure that there is a balance, and how do you ensure you are not facing an adverse balance? Now, we had a phase, I would say, late 40s, which were particularly testing for us. This was when this is still Stalin's Soviet Union at that time. I think the Indian diplomacy very sensibly set to work on the basic international relations principle of your neighbor's neighbor. So your neighbor's neighbor is intrinsically well disposed towards you. Since the 50s, actually, there's been a very systematic mutual cultivation. Now, it's not just us thinking about Soviet Union, now Russia. It's also the Russians thinking about India with the same principle and the same logic in mind. Now, that actually is such a powerful logic, at least in our part of the world, that if you consider international relations over the last 70 years, the US-Russian relations, the China-Russia relations, the US-China relations, Europe, pretty much every big relationship in the last 70 years has seen a great deal of volatility. You had sharp ups and downs. The India-Russia is very exceptional. It's been very steady. It may not be spectacular, so it may have stabilized at a certain level, but it has not seen that kind of ups and downs which your relations with Russia or China's relations with Russia or Europe's relationship with Russia has seen through, and that's in itself a statement. Now, if one looks at the world today, Russia today, I think as a consequence of what is going on in Ukraine, it seems to me clear, and I assume it seems to them clear, that in many ways Russia's relationship with the West has broken down. And in that case, it's logical that Russia focuses more on the Asian side of Russia, though historically Russia has always seen itself as a European power. So you are actually seeing a reinvention of Russia as a consequence of what is happening in Ukraine. You can see much of that will naturally focus on China, because that's the first and the largest country and economy that Russia encounters when it wheels around and looks at Asia. But then again, India will and has come into calculations as well. So I would predict actually a Russia which would consciously focus on the non-Western world, away from Europe, away from the United States, look much more at Asia, look possibly at other regions as well, but Asia is economically the most active. Yep. So I guess that's what you're going to see.
Okay. There's a growing recognition in the United States and India, I think, bolstered by Prime Minister Modi's tremendously successful visit last summer, that our two countries' interests are broadly and even strategically aligned in a way perhaps they have not been in the past. And this is that shift from dealing with one another to working with one another that you mentioned. Where do you see the principal areas where our interests are aligned, and what areas of tension and difference do you see at this point?
I would say they are aligned in a set of areas. In a kind of a geostrategic way, they are aligned. That we both want to see a certain stability and a certain set of rules and a certain, I would say, distribution of power, which is advantageous to both of us, and our interests are not clashing in that respect. So at the biggest picture level, I would say there's a very powerful case really for India and the US to work together. So if you look even within our systems, historically, it was actually our national security side which had the greatest suspicion or reservations about each other. Today, it's the national security side which is the most enthusiastic about it. The second is actually the economic side, but an economic side which is very heavily tech focused.
Yes.
Because if one looks at the direction of the global economy, in fact, you look at our own lives, the tech component of what we use and do and live amidst is increasing. And this what you can call it the knowledge economy, the information embedded economy, I think has created again a very powerful new convergence between us. Because at a global level, the United States will need partners, India will need opportunities and possibilities. So to me, if we are today talking about ISET, if we are, if you look at American priorities like the IRA and the CHIPS Act, I think these are all factors which will create a stronger sort of bonding. So if you can get I think if the politics works and the economics get stronger, then obviously there's a very, very strong convergence. Now you ask me where could they be or where are the problems? We are both, we are democratic societies, we are incredibly diverse, but we are diverse in very different ways.
Yes.
And we are very internally argumentative and externally, argumentative would be a mild word. So what happens is, I think we will have, there will be occasions where there will be that rub or that friction. And it will happen also because in a globalized world, our arguments are no longer contained in a national sphere. People who have a viewpoint in India will reach out to people who have a similar viewpoint in the US and vice versa. Today, political arguments are very, very global. And often, if you are having a global conversation, but not necessarily a global cultural understanding of each other, I think there's plenty of room there for friction. Often, I read judgments or I hear people say things in the US and sometimes in India too, where we are looking at the other society completely from our own template, from our own experience. And I think that would be an issue.
Well, I certainly would agree that both, from my experience, both Americans and Indians lead the world in moral lectures. We're both of our societies are.
We've
quite
been doing
good
it longer though.
Yes, no, you have a deeper experience. I won't deny. But kind of along these lines, I know that when Prime Minister Modi was here, a number of American representatives boycotted his address to Congress.
Some did. I don't know if I'd use the word a number.
Well, a number can be a small number.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be a big one.
Okay.
And I know I wrote a column about India in the Wall Street Journal, and I got there was a letter to the editor from Cardinal Dolan, who was a very well-respected, a man I personally respect tremendously, to the Journal expressing his concern that I hadn't said enough in my column about problems of religious minorities in India. So how would you sort of try to shape the conversation, or how would you respond to some of these concerns that people have here?
It would be a mix because, I think different people, if I don't know Cardinal Dolan, I'm a little more familiar with American politicians, including members of Congress. So I'm not, I know many of them have strong views, often electorally driven, sometimes culturally driven, all of that. So I'm a little hesitant to address specific examples. So but as a broad proposition.
Yes.
Look, as a broad proposition, all I can say where India is concerned is the underlying culture of India is deeply pluralistic. In fact, I cannot think of any society in the world, and I've lived in many of them, whether I look at Europe or look at North America, and North America, US is very pluralistic. China, I've lived in Russia. The diversity and the layers that you get in India, and you can slice it in different ways. It could be ethnicity, it could be faith, it could be language, it could be traditions. It's actually unique. It's truly, in multiple axes, the most diverse space in the world. Now, it is something, now when you have that kind of diversity, that diversity will always have its own conversations and discussions. It will be, there will be attempts to get a certain balance right, there will be corrections, there will be recorrections. It's in the nature of diversity. The only way you won't have those dialogues is when you don't have diversity, or when you have imposed something so strong that everything is okay in that place because everybody has either been forced to agree or conditioned to agree with each other. So we actually are a much more looser society where there's almost a natural inclination to disagree, and that is our national character. Now, when you have people who have not come through that experience, who for them, are listening, it's like you're listening to the next room, you really don't know the people in the next room, you're picking snatches of conversation, and then you are making a judgment or an opinion based on that particular soundbite that you picked up. So today, since you brought up the issue of minorities in India, look, what is the test really of fair and good governance, or of the balance of a society? It would be whether in terms of the amenities, the benefits, the access, the rights, do you discriminate or not? And in every society in the world, at some point, there's been some discrimination on some basis. So if you look at India today, it's a society today where there's a tremendous change taking place, because people are the biggest change happening today in India is the creation of a social welfare system in a society which has less than $3,000 per capita income. Nobody has done that in the world before. Now, when you look at the benefits of that, you look at housing, you look at health, you look at food, you look at finance, you look at access, educational access, health access. There's no, I defy you to show me discrimination. I mean, in fact, the more digital we have become, the more in a way faceless the governance has become. Actually, it's become fairer. But as I said, this is a globalized world. There will be people, you will have people gripe about it, and much of the griping is also political. Let me be very frank with you, because we've also had a culture of vote banks, and there are sections who had in their own eyes a certain privileged access, who today may resent the fact that they don't. It's a phenomenon with which you are not unfamiliar. And I think these will be the turbulence of a democratic society.
Okay. Well, now we in the United States have had the experience not only of lectures from India, but lectures from Canada. And, I think...
they look at you as the global South.
Yeah. It's one of the more interesting relationships. And I think Dean Acheson once wrote an essay about Canadian criticisms of the United States, and he titled it "Stern Daughter of the Voice of God." But certainly the Canadian Prime Minister has made some serious charges recently. But I also see that from press reports that you have met while you're in Washington with National Security Advisor Sullivan, with our Secretary of State, Blinken, and that this subject has come up. Can you give us any information about how this is or isn't affecting U.S.-India relations, where this whole matter stands now from your perspective?
Okay. So let me start with Canada. Yes, the Canadian Prime Minister made some allegations, initially privately and then publicly. And our response to him, both in private and public, were that what he was alleging was not consistent with our policy. And that if his government had anything relevant and specific they would like us to look into, we were open to looking at it. Now, that's where that conversation is at this point of time. But to understand that conversation, you have to also appreciate that this has been an issue of great friction for many years with Canada, in fact going back to the 1980s. Then it became dormant, but in the last few years it has come back very much into play because of what we consider to be a very permissive Canadian attitude towards terrorists, extremists, people who openly advocate violence. And they have been given operating space in Canada because of the compulsions of Canadian politics. I don't think most Americans, for Americans, perhaps Canada looks very different, but it depends, from where the interest, where the shoe pinches. For us, it has certainly been a country where organized crime from India mixed with trafficking in people, mixed with secessionism, violence, terrorism. It's a very toxic combination of issues and people who have found operating space there. So a lot of our tensions with Canada, which well preceded what Mr. Trudeau said, actually come out of that. And today I'm actually in a situation where my diplomats are unsafe going to the embassy or to the consulates.
In Canada?
In Canada. They are publicly intimidated. And that has actually compelled me to temporarily suspend even visa operations in Canada. So as I said, often countries look very different depending on how you see them and what your interests are. But I have this problem in Canada. And so your question, did I speak about it with Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken? Yes, I did.
And?
No. Let's put it this way. They obviously shared, U.S. views and assessments on this whole situation. And I explained to them at some length, what I gave you was a summary of the concerns which I had. So I think hopefully we both came out of those meetings better informed.
Right, well, thank you. Well, we are about to go to audience questions, and I see I have some here, but while I'm looking at them, do you have any advice for Americans who want to learn more about India? Where should young people or older people who are interested in this, where should they go to learn about this country that is looming larger and larger in American foreign policy and in world affairs?
Look, it's hard to give general advice, but I would say, and this really flows from our own conversation today, that in whatever profession people are, I think it would be useful to try to see how that particular profession or that particular set of interests are doing in India. Because there may be experiences there, there may be thoughts there, ideas there, which people would find useful. For many years, India has been an absorber, an active searcher for best practices around the world. I think today we can also contribute to best practices. I mean, I give you some very different examples of this. I mean, you would have all seen that our very persuasive advocacy of yoga over the last decade has improved global health. So if anybody wants to get up in the morning and wants to have a better day, I mean, my suggestion is please, look at your phone and find the most conducive yoga practice. But on the other hand, if you are someone in the digital world and you see really how creatively today, digital mediums and practices are being embraced. And I give you an example. If you are going shopping in India today, you can leave your wallet behind. You can't leave your phone behind, because most likely the person you're buying something from will not accept cash, will want you to pull out your phone, look at the QR code and make a cashless payment. Now, we are clocking, last year we clocked 90 billion cashless financial payments. Just for a reference, the US was about 3, and China was 17.6. This year we probably would exceed. I saw the June figures, it was 9 billion transactions in June alone. So I'm giving you that as an example. I mean, street vendors today will have a QR code on their cart and say, just make your payment there. So it could be digital, it could be wellness, it could be food habits, it could even be, this whole discussion today we have about pluralism, identity, culture, tradition. I think there are things to learn there, and I equally, just so that people don't think I'm back to that moralizing path, that, I do think Indians too, are getting very global. There, the world comes at you every waking hour through this wonderful instrument we carry with us. And the more we absorb, the better off we are.
Okay, great. Well, now I have some questions from the audience to ask. We have one from one of my fellow press reptiles who is here in the group today, has said that President Biden appeared confident enough in the intelligence about alleged Indian government involvement in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar to raise the issue with Prime Minister Modi at the G20. He asks, what have you done in response to the U.S. and other Western concerns? Maybe we've answered some of this already, but...
Sure. I think I answered that.
You've answered it. Okay, we move on. This is from someone at a think tank. We see India playing an increasingly important role in new multilateral groups like the G20, Quad, I2U2, India-Middle East Economic Corridor, et cetera. Is the Indian government looking to utilize this diplomatic momentum to strengthen more regional groupings such as SAARC, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, particularly the IORA?
Yep. We actually have an IORA meeting next month in Sri Lanka. I'll be going for that. I think, we've even tabled an Indo-Pacific Oceans initiative at the East Asia Summit, where we look at non-security aspects of protecting the ocean space. Today for us, the challenge is there are new opportunities, there are new combinations, and how do you do that without losing focus of what you have? So it's a kind of, it's a bird in the bush and the bird in hand, but you want to keep both of them. And part of the challenge is also to keep the older partners convinced that your interest in what you've been doing for some time remains. The SAARC is an exception there. It's currently dormant because one of its members, who will remain unnamed, believes that they can practice terrorism at no cost. So that's an exception. But otherwise, we've been pretty much active, and really even the latest latest initiative we're looking at is this Middle East corridor, which has India at one end and Europe at the other. So it has, for the moment, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but it is it's got the US as well as a kind of a guarantor partner, if you would. It really has a lot of possibilities because, given if we can find a more seamless, effective, competitive logistics between India and Europe, I think it will have enormous consequence for the global economy.
I have a follow-up question from someone else on the same sort of general role question. How do you see India's role changing in the Middle East? And I would add, I think many Americans may understand that there's a close India-Middle Eastern relationship on energy, but also Israel is a primary defense partner with India. And then we have millions of Indians who work in the Gulf countries. So the relationship—
9 million.
Yeah, the relationship is really quite close.
Right.
How do you see India's role developing in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, you, Walter, touched on the energy side. You've touched on the fact that you have 9 million expats in the Gulf. There's also the proximity, the historical connections out there. But we have to understand today that as India becomes a larger consumer, a bigger economy, our salience in the Middle East countries' calculations, especially the Gulf economies, is that much higher. For many countries, I think we are the largest trade partner of the UAE, and we would be among probably the top 3 of the Saudis. And it isn't just the volume of trade. We discovered during COVID, they discovered during COVID, that the Gulf is actually dependent on the daily food consumption for what comes out of India. So the economies have really got very, very deeply meshed. And today the Gulf itself is in transition. If you talk to the leadership in Gulf, they are talking renewables, they're talking green hydrogen, and a lot of them are very enthusiastic in terms of digital progress. So we are finding new areas of intersection with them. If you look at Indian businesses, we are today far more entrenched in the Middle East than we've been for a long time.
Yeah, I think that's right. We have a final question, and then we'll bring this part of the program to a close, which is, again, without mentioning any names, somebody's asked, as we speak today, the situation in India's western neighborhood is deteriorating at a fast pace. There could be a situation where a country could collapse or see unrest. How is India preparing for such an unknown event, or how could it prepare?
In an unnamed country.
In an unnamed country to the west of India.
We have a few countries.
There's more than one option.
Who are having problems of their own. Look, today there are countries in different parts of the world in crises of different kinds, and we have a few proximate to us. We saw Sri Lanka, which really went through a very, very, almost an economic meltdown last year, and we had to step forward because they were engaged in a negotiation with the fund, and their needs were so immediate and so serious that we actually did the largest bilateral lending that we've ever done, which was we gave them almost a package of $4 billion as a way of stabilizing their economy. The unnamed country to our west, which we are talking about, they have a much, their problems are much more long-term. They're much more deeper historically in terms of what happens when distortions have been introduced into the natural progress of an economy. That if you have, let us say, excessive expenditure on the military, or if your borrowing has not been prudent, or if you have infrastructure which doesn't pay its way, I think there are a lot of factors there. In multiple chickens are coming home to roost at the same time.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I know we're all grateful to Minister Jaishankar for his time. I'll ask you to respect that time as we go. He has a very busy schedule today, so he and I will head out here. There is coffee and other assorted delicacies in the back, I'm afraid more American than Indian. And in 15 minutes, we'll reassemble here where there's going to be a panel discussion led by Hudson's Japan chair and a very distinguished fellow and longtime friend of India, Ken Weinstein. And so I hope to see you back for that soon.